November 19th.
Starting.
At ease. We'll call this special work session, City Council on November 19th, 2024 to order. First item on the discussion, and before I do that, I want to mention that Councilman Mike McCree has an excused absence this evening. First on the discussion items is Tourism Development Advisory Committee, state accommodations, tax, ground wars, recommendations. I saw Chet here. If anybody else going to come out and take more of us here. Okay, and all of y'all want to come on, go ahead. Come on.
Now, let's introduce our team committee for this year. We got Dean Aldisai serving on for chairman, and Chuck Patero, Randy Novick, and Jennifer Payton as well, and Kathy Beckman. But they had a lot of applications to review and go through, and they had presentations on October 30th, and they also presented their recommendations in your packet for that. And then this year with new, we had Facebook Live, the presentations, and also recorded their discussion for those recommendations as well for review and transparency as well. And it should be your packet. We have their recommendation. We have a few more to start off. How level comments about?
I think everyone got our recommendations in the backs, kind of our what we deliberated on in your emails, if I'm not mistaken. A couple things started with, there was a couple comments on whether the nonprofit standings were valid. Chet and I today, before we came here, we went through everyone and they're all in good standing with the state of Secretary of State, which is what the application states.
Any comments from council? Questions? Thank you all for the sun. That certainly helped out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a comment. First, I want to applaud what you've done. I appreciate the work you've done and providing these recommendations to us. It's I also would like to start off by saying for all the organizations that got 100% of your recommendations, I agree with those. However, with $47,863 left that was not recommended, there are organizations that were did not receive their requested amount. So for the delta on those organizations, and specifically I'm referring to the Gullah Travel Theater, Friends of Hunting Island, Freedman's Arts District, and the original Gullah Festival. I would ask that $47,863 be used to make the Gullah Traveling Theater, Friends of Hunting Island, Freedman's Arts District whole in your recommendations, and that the balance that will not make the original Gullah Festival whole be awarded to the original Gullah Festival. I do not think that money in this ATAC cycle should be held over for a year, although I know that you're aware, and I've been made aware, that there will be a shortfall next year. When that shortfall comes, we'll collectively, all participants, deal with it.
I'll look through there.
So, sorry, just one thing, is everyone clear on the Tabernacle Church or what we are recommending for that? Any questions regarding that?
No, I'm good with that.
Or were you, do you have any questions about the Tabernacle Church, Baptist Church, what we were recommending for that?
This is one that had money from last year.
Okay.
That's Councilman Mitchell's comment there. I know going forward this year, occupancies are lower in the hospitality sector, so we know our funds are gonna be less next year. This year was also the first year that we eliminated the 50% match.
Now
That's when staff eliminated the 50% grant match this year. So next year, that's gonna be going back into play again. Some of the organizations effectively this year are being funded 75%, not through just Beaufort County, or not through Beaufort City, but through Beaufort County as well. I don't know, I think we as a committee felt that we should leave funding there for next year because it's, I know on the hospitality side, we have discussed it with the committee. We're roughly 10% less than we are last year in terms of revenue. That dollar amount that's being carried forward is about 10%. So it allows, I mean, it just allows us the same flexibility next year.
Yeah.
Into it.
I accept that, but my concern with that is this. For these organizations, starting at the top, and like I said, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting we take any money from the organizations that you recommended 100% for. But if we keep the residual, or maybe there's a better word, accounting word for it, but the $47,863. And then we use that to make up whatever difference that you foresee is not going to be there next year. Then some of these organizations who got 100% this year, in essence, when they participate in the 47,000, which is part of the A tax for this year, they'll be getting 100% plus. And I don't think that's fair when you have organizations that's not getting what they've asked for. They already have a delta. So it may just be a difference of perspective, but that's my perspective.
What do you mean by over 100%?
What are you going to do with the $47,863?
But that's not my question. My question is, you're saying funding certain
No, I'm
entities
asking-
over 100%.
I'm answering your question with a question. You answer my question, you'll have the answer to your question. I'm asking you, what will you do with the money that you're not spending this year? What will you do with it next year?
It'll go back in the pot.
And what will you do with it next year in the pot?
It'll go towards applications.
And all of these organizations that got 100% will be part of those applications, will they not?
I don't have an answer.
Well, they've been a part of it for the last 4
Some of
years.
these are new.
They've been a part of it for the last 4 years that I've been a part of this process. So I'm just saying that this year, we're dealing with the A tax for this year. These A tax funds are for this year. Why don't we just apply them to this year? And when next year comes, whatever the A tax funds are, we'll deal with it with the funds we have. That's my perspective. I'm not saying right or wrong, but that is what I'm sharing.
That excludes the DMO because the DMO is by state law gets 40%.
I get all that, Phil.
Anyone else?
Got one question about Friends of Hunting Island. The cost is 30,000. They've asked for 15,000 with 1,500 coming from other sources, and you've allotted 10,000. So what if they don't make up that other? What is it, about 18,500? Are we giving, or allotting money that for a project that might not happen, or?
I'm sorry, that's not what I'm showing.
That's a typo on this portion,
What is the other time?
on this right here.
The Friends of Hunting
Yeah,
Island?
that's.
Let me see that.
It says the total cost was 30,000.
That was right in the application.
That's right.
The application is 15.
15.
Total was 30,000.
It's total 1,000, but their other funding is, I don't have the application. Do you?
Their other funding was 15 and
So then this
they
is-
asked for 15 originally and they're being recommended is 10,000.
So this other funding on this sheet is a typo. It says 1,500, but it's 15,000.
15,000, okay, that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
On this one. That's one.
Okay, yeah.
their other funding is 15,000.
Okay, I've seen a big shortfall, but that project might not happen, that's what I was wondering.
Here's the time we'll get that corrected. Okay, for next meeting.
So, I have some questions and I can justify my positions, but I don't know that I want to get too far into the weeds of each application. One, for starters, I watched both the meetings that you guys had, and the educational meetings for the applicants prior. And I just want to reiterate and point out that I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the level of thorough review that came from you guys. I personally want to steer away from altering these recommendations too much because I feel like we have an appointed TDAC committee that this is your expertise. You guys are in the accommodations business, and so having say in what and how these funds can best be utilized has a lot of merit in my mind. I don't want to undermine the decisions that you guys make. So I just want to make that very clear that I appreciate the level of thoughtfulness that went into these recommendations. The first question that I have, to be completely fair, is going to be for the city. And that is in regards to the twilight hours. So I see we have $100,000 being recommended for that initiative. My understanding when we originally put the $100,000 aside for that was to basically create programs and incentives to stimulate evening commerce downtown. So if I were to take a very fair approach here, I would say that there would need to be some kind of metric provided in this application to show what that first $100,000 did, what was the success, what programs were created, what incentives were provided, and how the businesses, the city, and everybody else benefited from the expenditure of those funds prior to approving an additional $100,000. I would have liked to see that. Is that what you have or no?
What additional $100,000 question?
So this $100,000, because we set aside $100,000 from last year. So what's that?
In the FY25 budget,
Right.
yes.
And so. Wait. So this is the first $100,000?
Yes.
I was thinking we set aside $100,000 last year for this.
No, FY25.
Okay,
Unless I'm completely blank,
maybe I'm mistaken on that.
I don't think we did that for.
I watched the meeting from last year's day and it was put aside. Now, I didn't watch to see if it went through, but it was
I thought I
stated.
remembered that, and maybe I should have been very clear prior, but I was pretty sure that we set aside $100,000 last year for this.
If we did, it was the same $100,000 that was carried over for FY25, it wasn't an additional. Do you recall,
We did 24 and 25, that's more of a carryover.
we didn't use
Wasn't
much.
Wasn't much expenditures in 24.
So this is the same money? Or this, because this is an additional $100,000 that's coming out of this. So this wouldn't be a carryover.
What is it? I'm confused with the additional $100,000.
This $100,000 is coming from the 969 to make up the $471,000 that would be provided to applicants. Right? So that
Looks
it leads to me to believe that that 100,000 is being deducted from 933,000, or essentially with interest added to 969,000 that's talked about here.
Okay.
So if that's the case, then perhaps I'm wrong, but my point here is if we already set aside $100,000, I would want to see the benefits and the fruits of what came from that expenditure prior to approving an additional $100,000 to that.
Well, first of all, this is completely mislabeled. Police support, downtown Fallback Knowledge, affordable housing trust. City General Fund, DMO, those are not TDAC grants. Those are budgeted items in the city's budget. So that's completely mislabeled.
I got that from,
I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying.
I'm just saying, I got that from.
The TDAC grants is not accurate. Those are budgeted allocations from ATAX.
From the city, but coming from the ATAX.
Yes,
Right.
but not grants. That's where I was confused.
Okay, so I guess the first thing to clarify is whether or not this is an additional $100,000. If it is, then personally, I would want to see the justification for why we would have an additional $100,000 funding that initiative and potential programs and incentives without seeing what came of the first expenditure. If that is the case, then an alternative proposal in my mind would be the fact that we just passed the housing impact analysis. Act 57 sunsets in 2030. Aside from a previous commitment with the housing trust, I didn't see anything in here to work towards providing affordable housing. We just had the Affordable Housing Forum. I read through the presentation that you emailed us over, Councilman Mitchell, and it was very clear that we're going to have a consistent drop in our labor force for the next 5 years. And so any funding that we could set aside for affordable housing, I think would prove to be extremely beneficial. But we would first need to clarify that this 100,000 isn't just simply meeting the need of our past commitment of providing funding for the downtown twilight hours. And right now, I don't know that.
Well, that's the purpose of the 100,000. It's 100,000 that was carried over from last year. So it's not expenditure of $100,000 last year and $100,000 this year. It's the same $100,000 that was carried forward at FY25. That's my recollection of it. Alan,
The same from 24 to 25.
but we have not implemented a program yet to spend it. So it's not $200,000. It's just $100,000 carried over because it was not spent.
44, right?
Okay.
So that helped.
Small portion of it has been spent, I believe, but.
That helps. I'm gonna need to see it, so I'll leave that there and we can,
Sure.
we'll just, whatever, Alan, whatever you could produce, that would allow me just to see that
Right.
carry over and not an additional expense. I would definitely appreciate that, and then it would help me moving forward, so.
And we can also report on that publicly, just because you
Okay.
raised the question publicly.
Right.
So as we give a public response, so when this is brought to council for decisions and action on award of grants, Alan will have that information for you.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. All right, so I will leave that there. So Rob, I appreciate the information that you provided. I wanted to just see the drop in occupancy for myself, because looking at the funds set aside, respectfully, I'll take a different position than Councilman Mitchell in this regard, because I could see approximately definitely over a 4% drop in occupancy. And so the funding that's set aside here would equate to about 4% of what the total pot of money is that we got. And I'm not sure that just because we have a request for funding that we need to always provide that funding to the tune of spending everything in here, if there is an opportunity for us to be a little bit more forward thinking. And I think that's what the TDAC committee tried to do. So for what it's worth, I appreciate that that forward thinking, and would not look to in the immediate change the recommendation to set aside the remaining funds. The 40,000 sales plan, I looked through that, that is justified in my mind. Oyster Festival, so just pointing this out, not necessarily as a discussion point, but just for my own curiosity. I noticed that for the Oyster Festival, Ashley dropped the TV advertising, which if I remember right, you guys asked for about $11,000 for that specific itemized ad last year. And so you dropped that, but I noticed that the Gullah Festival doubled the TV ads. Last year, I think you guys asked for 10,000. This year, you're going for 20,000. So seeing that the Oyster Festival dropped it from theirs, I would think that there would be some kind of a metric that would show maybe it wasn't producing the results, the required or the desired results. But then seeing that the Gullah Festival doubled down on the request for TV ads, now I'm not sure. But just a point of observation really more than anything else there. The Low Country Resort Island Tourism, I had some questions that were previously answered in regards to that, so I appreciate each sending over information. I think the School of Fish exhibit is a really good idea. I had a completely different envision for what that would look like, and then I read the description and I'm like, oh, we're hanging cobia from the ceiling. Okay, that'd be cool too. But film festival, no issues there. Traveling theater, for the most part, that one's funded. I think you guys asked for 40, getting recommendation is 30,000. I don't have any issues with that. I don't have any issues with the Beaufort Water Search and Rescue. I did have some questions regarding the EIN number and their standing, and in the moment that request has been satisfied. And so I just want to say, I know you guys haven't applied for any funding before, but I greatly appreciate the value and the service that you guys provide to the tourists and the residents alike that come here. So I know that it's a little bit maybe of a stretch in regards to funding, but it definitely is a justifiable expense in my mind, and I think in language for state statute as well. Good catch, Councilman Lipsitz on the hunting island. I looked at the application and saw that the request was for 15,000, and they had an additional 15,000 from other sources. But that's a good catch that it was a typo there. Friends of the Spanish Moss Trail, I believe there was a question raised in the, I'll call it educational meeting, about whether or not the funding could be for capital improvements or if it had to be for just wayfinding and advertising. And I think, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the clarification that was provided was in line with the infrastructure and capital improvements could be made within reason with this funding. The Spanish Moss Trail, as I understand it, provides an amenity to not just residents, but over 100,000 visitors a year. So some capital improvements may be justified and would be allowed with some of this funding. Chalk It Up Festival, I just out of curiosity, I was looking, what's that?
Sure, your Spanish, was that a question or was that a?
We had the same.
No, I was just acknowledging the fact that that question came up and that I think you guys did a good job answering it. And if somebody else feels different, feel free to let me know.
Real quick, I just curious on the wayfinding signs, it shows that they're not asking for any other money, that they're not going to the county for any assistance on this.
Not for this, but they are going to the county for something else.
Okay.
I was just curious about if somebody else had done, a Chalk It Up Festival and had success, and I saw how much success Georgia has had with that. So I'm excited to see us carry that forward and have another festival. Look forward to seeing how that grows. The Gullah Festival, I think that's probably the the hardest one because it's partially funded. They originally requested 53,000 and are getting 21,500. But if I dove down into some of the application, it does look like some of the expenditures are a lot more than what they were last year. And one of them is the publicity materials expense. Last year, you guys said that was gonna be 6,000. This year, it's 15,000. Billboard advertising, 20,000. There was $0 requested for that last year. Television expense was 10,000 last year, 20,000 this year. So the curious side to me would wonder why some of those are needed to be so much more when it sounds like, just looking at how the event turned out, that it was a very successful event last year. So I'm not sure if maybe there's a little bit of cutting back that can be done there, but again, like I said, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of the application, but it did stand out to me that there was less than half of the requested amount being recommended. Penn Centers gave their full request. Black Chamber of Commerce, I'm not sure exactly of the details here, but it did look to me like the application was submitted well after the deadline. So the deadline was September 13th. The application was submitted October 10th. So unless there was further justification for why, I would question that application just based on that. I'd also ask if there was a representative. I thought I saw Miss Marilyn Harris here. I would ask this just out of curiosity. My understanding was that the Bella Geechee community came together and created an app, agriculture this last year that they released. And I didn't know if there was an opportunity to maybe combine what you had proposed here with the app that they already created and maybe save funding instead of having a completely new app. Have you looked at that app they released last year or this year?
We have not. This
Okay.
may be an opportunity.
Okay, I think that would be a good opportunity because I actually downloaded that app. And some of what appears to be the intent is right in line with what you were proposing in this application. The Tabernacle Baptist Church, I did have a hard time. I could not find anything under that EIN number. There was an extra dash in there, but even after removing that, I was unable to see anything. So maybe I was doing something wrong. I don't know, but the TDAC pointing out that there was additional funds that had not been used for last year's event, I think is justifiable for the recommendation that we see here. I already covered the request for moving the 4% or approximately 4% over, or leaving that unexpended. I think that covers my positions on each application, and if anybody has any further questions for me, I would definitely stand ready to answer those.
Anyone else?
Got one comment to make. You keep recommending that the Gullah Festival is the wrong time of the year, that it was a different month. It was done to coincide with Decoration Day, which is Memorial Day, which is one of the reasons for having it then. So I mean, to me, you do away with the festival if you change the date is set in stone with Memorial Day and Decoration Day. I just thought I'd throw that at you, because if you look at the history of the festival and look at the history of the holiday, Memorial Day, you'll see the reason for it. That's just my 2 cents.
Fully aware of that.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
we're aware of the history behind the festival.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because I saw your
I think it's,
recommendation last year, this year.
I think it's important. I've noticed historically always falls on Memorial Day. And historically Memorial Day is always the second or third busiest travel day of the year nationwide. So it's,
Well, that's the reason they have it there, is what I'm saying, because it's decoration.
it's trying to justify the best use of funds to generate more heads and beds at the end of the day. When you're already talking about the third busiest travel day of the year.
Yeah, well, I just want to throw those 2 cents in with that.
I think a lot of those folks who may come during Decoration Day, Memorial Day, Dollar Festival, maybe they whet their appetite and they come back another day. It's just not about being there that one day. And I think you guys are focused on, this whole idea that we could move it is just ludicrous. So we need to stop having that conversation. But what I think we need to try to measure is, of those people who come doing that day, and quite a few people do, how many of them come back during other days?
Any other comment from council? I'm gonna open it up for the public. Anybody from the public have something to say? Please come over here so we can get your name and your address.
Yummy Rutherford, and I live on Ladies Island, and I represent the Freeman Arts District. First, thank you guys. I know that was a very long day for you, so I appreciate all that y'all done. When we applied, the day we gave our presentation, we were in talks with, the South Carolina Valley. And unfortunately, we've been waiting and waiting for them to, sort of get back with us, and they did so almost exactly after our presentation. And what we weren't able to include in the Chalk It Up Festival application is that we have been able to sign a contract with Jonathan Green, the ballet, that is going to be coming to Beaufort on the 29th. And it's going to be off the wall onto the stage, which has been highly acclaimed all over, especially in the New York Times. It's very well known. And that's going to be a much added expense to us. But we do know without a doubt that it's going to bring a lot of people in town. We've already announced it, and the amount of people who are reaching out to us from all over already trying to buy tickets when we don't even have them for sale. So if there is a surplus, we would like that to be included, because that's a significant expense. It's actually it's about $38,000 for us.
Just asking if you give us the amount we originally asked for, not just.
Anyone else? Right.
Two coming from Dollar Festival and Dollar Travel Theater. Again, going back.
We want your picture and everything. Public.
I'm getting these bullets, we'll both be speaking. Speaking to the Gullah Festival again, and reference to, we know that's a big travel date. We won't move 4th of July or Christmas or any of those other things because they're big traveling days. We can't measure, and you all can't measure, just like Councilman said, when people come to the Gullah Festival, that's like a Super Bowl Sunday commercial for Gullah history. When Budweiser pay all that money for you to watch their beer on that Sunday, they expect you to drink beer 364 more days. So when they come to our Gullah Festival or even our Sea Island Christmas celebration, they come and they get a taste, and we expect them to come back some more because we're Gullah 365 and a fourth day. We don't just advertise Beaufort just around this festival. We travel all over the world promoting Beaufort, not just Gullah, but Beaufort. We put heads in your beds, and we don't have a hotel. But we put on these events that cost a whole lot of money to put heads in those beds. They don't come to Beaufort because we have hotels. They come to Beaufort because we have events. They come to Beaufort because we have historical places for people to see. They come to Beaufort because we have beautiful beaches. They come to Beaufort because of the fresh air. That's why they come to Beaufort. And so we have to put our money where our mouth is. If you say you embrace this, we're not asking for anything extra. This little $40,000, we already spent $20,000 alone almost in just TV ads. That's not even the radio ads yet for this Christmas celebration. And most of the events that we have that we've expanded from 1 day to now 4 days. To keep people here, to keep people in your beds and seats in your restaurants. That's what we do. So we your personal marketing plan, we your event planners, we do all of that for these hotels and these restaurants that benefit from these events. I'm not asking you for your money. I'm asking you for the money that we've helped to produce by putting heads in your beds. This is not a handout. And you make us feel like we're asking for a handout for monies that we work to produce. Now, when I'm traveling and doing this, it's easy. They pay my expenses. I go, I sit in the chair, run my mouth, and I bring the monies back to invest in Beaufort. But when we plan these events here, we're planning all year long to get people here to see this beautiful culture that we're all part of. And we try to make it inclusive. Most of what we have going on the Sea Island weekend is free. It's free. We've bartered with people. We've done collaborations. And all we're asking for is what we need to keep promoting Beaufort. Nothing more, nothing less. And to have to keep coming here to do this is ridiculous to me. We've proven that we're able to bring heads in beds. And what we do with a lot of groups that come, they'll come and they say, oh my God, I wish I'd have brought so-and-so. Guess what? We can do a private mini festival for you. Bring your family reunions back in. Bring your class reunions back in. Bring your sisterhood, whatever, back here. We can put together something for you on the off seasons, on the times when the hotels are not filled, so that we can put those heads in your beds and keep profits coming in your pockets. I'm done.
Anyone else?
Denise Colette also responding to some of the questions that were raised about the original Gullah Festival, South Carolina's 2025 festival. Yes, you will see an increase in the budget, particularly around advertising. That's very intentional. As we have met with with Rob Wells and DMO to discuss areas of growth for the festival. We are specifically targeting more direct flight areas. We are specifically going well beyond the 50 miles so that we can start to draw people from other places. So two things that are a part of that strategy. One is to increase advertising. It won't all be in the same place. It will be starting to broach some new marketplaces like Washington, D.C., like Philadelphia, like Baltimore, places that we can start advertising in January and February so that people can make plans to come and come now for the festival or come later to experience other things. Because if you go on our website, you'll see that we don't just advertise our stuff. We advertise lots of Gullah history and culture that's going on down here, not to mention the connections to the Visit Beaufort website. The second part of our strategy is to increase entertainment significantly for Sunday. We found that the numbers on Sunday fall behind Friday and Saturday tremendously. And so we are revving up the Sunday afternoon entertainment so that people will stay longer, stay the extra day through the holidays and have a reason to do so. So that is the reason why you see some of those shifts in the numbers.
So I guess that particular point does explain the entertainment going from, I think it was 30,000 last year, 56,000 this year.
We're trying to get it up. We may not get it all, but we are definitely trying to invest in Sunday, and we are trying to invest in marketplaces that are direct drive or direct flight into Beaufort.
I don't have I was gonna say, I don't have the technology of Rob Wells, but I went to the festival just talking to people, where are you from? I was surprised, Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta, I was getting all these different responses, just talking to the people.
Exactly. You know, I'm a transplant. I've told you that story before. I came here to visit the Gullah Festival. I now live here. And that was 25 years ago. And I didn't move here until 4 years ago. That's the amount of impression that this community made on me when I came down here 25 years ago. And I have friends that all we do is share pictures like everybody else, whether you do it on Facebook or by email or Instagram, whatever it is you use. And most of my friends, I mean, of course, they're always welcome to my home, but my friends call me now. Last year for the Gullah Festival, I had friends from Chicago called me 5 weeks before and said, I hope your guest room's free because we're heading your way for the Gullah Festival. I'm like, really? Like, yeah, we told you we wanted to come, we're coming. Same thing happened this year for the Sea Island Christmas. 5 weeks ago, my two best friends in Baltimore said, hey, is Christmas still on down there? I said, as far as I know, because we're heading your way. I said, oh, you're coming to us for Christmas? We're doing Christmas at my house? Good to know. And they said, no, we're coming for the show and the Christmas celebration weekend. So I have my two best friends from Baltimore are flying in on Wednesday and leaving on Monday to make sure they don't miss one moment of Sea Island Christmas. And I promise you this, as a child of God, I have not been promoting this stuff to them beyond when the event happens, maybe sending a couple pics of me and my family enjoying ourselves. So when they talk about those dates having extenders far beyond, they do. And it all benefits our community.
I got a quick question.
For me?
Well, anybody about the Gullah Festival.
Okay.
So speaking of entertainment, so
Come forward.
Come forward.
come forward.
If you want to know,
We gotta get a pretty face on the camera.
So yeah, so I remember the year, right? I think it was 1990. So I printed the flyer for the band for the Gullah Festival right around 1990. It wasn't planned, it just happened. It was the New Enterprise Band. So my question would be, does the Gullah Festival go back before 1990? I didn't.
It's the 40th year.
40th year.
There you go.
Yeah,
I believe it.
yeah.
Thanks a lot. So that would be 84. Thank you.
One question for Jeremy, I guess. So I saw that there was a recommendation from the TDAC committee to maybe move the event next year to the beginning of March, if I remember right. I guess that would be because the beginning of March is a slower time than the end of March. From the Freedom's Arts District perspective, is that something that you guys are looking at next year, or are you gonna try to keep the time?
We're happy to look at that. The only thing that we have to be extremely cautious of is gonna be the weather. This is an outdoor festival and it's an outdoor arts festival. So a lot of rain really precludes the amount of chalk that we would be able to keep on the sidewalk. So that's something that we do have to keep in mind, but it's definitely not something that, we would be willing to look at that.
Okay.
I went there last year. Y'all changed the venue, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You want to tell everybody where it is?
Sure. It's gonna be where the tapping place is, so we're gonna have something there on Friday night. And then the parking lot behind tapping place and to the right of it is where we're gonna have, it's recently been paved, and so we're gonna have the chalk festival.
Anyone else? Hearing none. Yes, Virginia, I want to thank the TDAC committee for their information and their hard work, and I guess what we'll have to do as council is to decide what we want to do. And make some recommendations back, I guess, to the TDAC on where we want to fall on this. We do have the 47,000 out there, and I understand why we need to keep it to have a cushion for next year, but also want to make sure that some of these events are close to being fully funded this fall. With that, thank you all, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is a presentation of city-owned property, return on investment analysis. Alex, here we go.
Mayor, before Alan gets started, I just want to say, what staff did was as requested, they did a true return on investment analysis for the properties. Not a year over year, what does this cost us a year, how much we're paying this year? So true return on investment formula that we use, and I also want to point out that we link that. Part of that formula includes current value of the property that you own. In order to get current value of the property, the owner would have to request appraisal. Appraisal would cost anywhere from $500 to $1,500 more per property. We did not feel like that was cost effective in this exercise, so we use the assessed value. I say all that to say, even the numbers that you see here on return on investment, bottom line is a very conservative number. So with that said, I'll turn it over.
All right, that's kind of a little bit of background. As I mentioned, we first talked about this back in February of the Council Strategic Plan Retreat. And we broke it down, these different categories. You see here the 6 different categories. Here's the format we have for each of the properties, primary use of the facility, the date of acquisition, the initial cost. Some properties were unable to determine the initial cost through the age or history, so I just, sometimes I put in a dollar amount, but that would be something to change. Maybe pending some further research. And also the current value, as city manager mentioned, we pulled most of these from our 2023 assessed values for property tax bills. Although we did not order any current property appraisals at this time. We have revenues and expenses through June 30th, and then our return on investment. And also, I also provided a breakdown of where I got my numbers from. That's another Word document for each property. It kind of provides everybody a little more drill down information about it. There's more of a summary for this presentation. And here's the return on investment calculation that we use for this presentation. Took the current value, subtracted out the cost of investments plus these net operating expenses, which is defined as all debts and credits associated with property, utilities, insurance, maintenance, repairs, and also any revenues associated with it as well. And for this presentation, I included included the past 5 years of operating revenues and expenses, along with any capital expenditures and associated revenues for the past 10 years. Just to kind of provide as much information as I can. Some stuff was hard to find history for many decades ago, but try to kind of have what we have right now. And a positive ROI number reflects that total returns exceed total costs, and a negative ROI number reflects that total costs exceed total returns. That's kind of the baseline for our calculation. Now we'll begin with our first category, which is our staff occupied or operational uses. Start out with 500 Carteret Street. This is for office space for Beaufort Digital Corridor, Park Beaufort, downtown operations, and other tenants. It was acquired from the city in January 2018. Initial cost is a little over $1.2 million. That was a lease purchase agreement. We have quarterly payment from January 2016 and January 2018. And the current assessed value for both the building and the parking lot is coming out a little over $4 million. We have revenues about $489,000, expenses about $614,000. Based on the ROI calculation, the return on investment is 216% of that property.
Alan, on the expenses on that, the 614, is that outfits?
Yeah, it includes outfits as well. It includes the landing pad, some of the capital improvements that we did as well. We also received some great revenue associated with that as well, which I factor that in part of the revenues, but I try to include as much capital that I was able to find as well.
There's a little more detail in my software narrative document for you, because you raise a good question, Mayor, and that is the expenses could be annual expenses, recurring expenses, or they could, you know, they also can be inclusive of one-time expenses, like you mentioned the other day, so. But those are broken down and out.
Revenue, would that be considering what staff would be paying if they were having to go somewhere else, a different place?
No, we do not factor in any opportunity costs. These are all actual numbers.
So we should be actually higher than that.
Revenues are rentals.
ROI.
Yeah,
These are rentals from our tenants, some capital grants we had from the landing pad project.
parking probably.
Yeah.
So staff use, if we were to include that as opportunity cost, you know, what it would cost if they were elsewhere paying, then the ROI would be considerably higher.
Yeah, and that's also a good question, because that would be a different analysis than just a simple ROI analysis, because that would also include factoring in what would we get in revenue if that was a taxable property every year. So there are a lot of expenses that aren't figured if it was a different type of scenario, which that's not what the request was, and that's not what the exercise
And
was.
you're including property taxes in here, even though we don't pay property taxes.
Yeah, the city just pays for stormwater fees, and we do pay some property taxes. But I did include, but it's pretty minimal for most of these properties. There's small amounts that city pays. But yeah, that's just based on city owned property, property taxes. We pay the stormwater fee, we don't pay any associated taxes on properties. All right, next is 1901 and 1911 Boundary Street, which is City Hall, and then our police and court complex. Home to these departments, city manager, human resources, finance, and community development departments, and also, of course, police and court. Acquired back in 2010 or built in 2010. Initial cost was 15 million from the issuance of a 2008 GEO bond. And the current value from the property tax bill is over 23 million. Revenues I have none, and the expenses show 8.3 million, which most are, a good part of that is the associated interest from the GEO bond. So I want to kind of make sure to factor that into our expenses for that. That gives us a return on investment a little less than 3%.
We will be getting some revenues, the heck lease, correct?
Right, yeah, that's future ROI calculations will include that.
That's a question. And maybe I should ask you, but because we're gonna go through all of these slides in a similar format, and we're gonna get to the final ROI on each other. What are we trying to determine here? What is the overall purpose of this? What outcome are we looking for?
I think that the overall purpose in my mind is to see if there's some non-performing, underperforming properties that maybe we need to jettison. If they're not beneficial to the city, or they don't have a public purpose that we go forward.
Got it, okay, thanks.
Because we do have some geo debt on some things, and I'd like to be able to have some money coming back if we do decide to sell something.
Next is Fire Station 1, which is headquarters at 35 Repo Road. This is where the fire station and also the fire admin offices are located. I believe the date of acquisition was February of 1983 for land, then option it being built in January of 1990. Also showing based on the property tax records that the land cost $67,000 and the building was $640,000. Current assessed value is a little over $1.1 million. No revenue generated from this property, and expenses are $164,000. Translate to a return on investment of 38%. Fire Station 2, further down on Reba Road. They acquired the land was June of 2014, and then the building was built in January 2016. So the initial cost was $33,000 for the land. The building was a little shy of $3.5 million. The current value is $4.2 million. The revenues generated and expenses of $84,000. It's mostly just the maintenance and operating expenses for this property. And our Fire Station 4, was acquired in December of 2021. $3 million from issuance of 2021 GEO bond. The current value is right at $3 million for this. The revenue generated, expenses about $412,000, which includes $94,000 from the associated GEO bond interest that we have paid so far for that bond. This does show a negative return of investment of negative 13% this property this time.
Next time we do this, Alan, can you put the bonds, the geo bonds and the revenue bonds with, maybe shape geo bonds, a term on those?
Yeah. We had.
I'm sorry.
So as that bond is paid off, this ROI will probably change significantly. So some of this, you have to factor in the decision making, maybe more long term as opposed to just looking at.
I would imagine that we're not positioning to sell the fire departments or parks. Okay, because most of this appears to be fire department, parks, public works buildings.
I rejected every offer so far.
Right. I don't think we're selling city hall.
Well, we have that memorandum of agreement with Beaver County for design and future build of, in addition to Station 1, to house EMS response crews together with our fire crews. Right, we're still in the beginning process of that. So the plan is, yes, to co-locate them together there. We're not sure who's bearing which expenses yet. We haven't gotten to that part. We haven't gotten to that part of the puzzle yet, but.
The county was gonna pay for all of that.
Well, they were gonna pay for the initial design.
They were gonna pay for their portion of the renovations, we were gonna pay for our portions, and they were gonna pay for the design up front.
Right. Okay. Yeah, they take the design, but the rest is still to be negotiated. Mayor, Council, for expediency's sake, it pains me to watch Alan just read from a slide. So can we get to each property, go to the bottom line, this is the return on investment, and then if you have any questions about that property.
That would make more sense.
Do that.
We got Public Works complex. Are all about 92%. The assessed value of over $2 million for that property. That includes the building and the land as well for Hill Road. Next, we go to the passive parks. So with that, so passive parks are also kind of added parks as well. This is for Morale Park, which is located on Craven and Carteret Street. So I was unable to determine when the property was acquired by the city and what we were paying for. I just put $1 in there now, which is probably not correct, but I just wasn't sure what the amount of the city cost was for that piece of property. And finding in the property tax records, you see we have a pretty high ROI. It's probably inflated.
No, read that number out loud.
So just so you know, we wrestled with whether to actually put a ridiculous number like that on the slide, right? And so my initial response to Alan was, no, just put not applicable, but I thought, no, it's a formula. We're gonna apply the formula, but I think the fact that you're showing something that has a 46,129,400% return demonstrates the absurdity of running this exercise on passive parks. So so this is in here just to illustrate that in the future, when we take on private, let's set some parameters on which properties we're going to look at and which properties it makes no sense to look at.
It gets crazier too, the numbers.
It does, so I just, but just so you know, there was some thought put into that, it wasn't just slapped.
I should have invested in parks.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna, I don't think you should sell this part.
What an ROI as well, $100 million percent.
Mutual funds.
That park is pretty high as well.
That's one,
But I've always paid for that $1 cost. I'm sure there's probably higher than that, so we bring it down some. Waterfront Park. Same, I think I was unable to determine what the initial cost was, $1 million. The probably could be higher, could be a little bit lower, back in 1979.
I can tell you the ROI is going to be a lot lower on that.
Yeah.
Pretty low now.
Yeah.
Include all the revenues and expenses, the Waterfront Park that I was able to put together, and like I said, all those details in the other agenda packet. ROI right now is showing 41%. Also did the marina, or in 1991, initial cost, I was able to see what property tax records showed 111,000. Pretty high ROI, but come down as well. Some current situation. Southside Park, able to determine ROI. I believe this got acquired through, was it BJWC as a kind of easement or something like that? I was not trying to find history on that, but as a ROI of like 500%, but just based on that additional cost. Washington Street Park. Yeah, $100,000 initial cost for that. It shows a ROI of 386%.
These include any of the improvements coming up.
Some of the south side did, Washington Park, we haven't done that as of June 30th, so I didn't include that yet, but there's improvements coming in. Ridgely Point Park. Assessed value about 2.5 million, which translates to an ROI of 119%. 1100 Boundary Street. 2.3 million of this through that 2021 geo bond. Current value is about 4.5 million. An ROI about 90%. It's property. Raven Street. This one I was able to dig through some records or I'll look on Google for this. That paid $750 local match with a $7,500 grant from the Carnegie Corporation. I translate that to today's dollars, about $23,000. That showed pretty high ROI, but we do have some capital needs in that building as well that we're addressing currently.
Were you able to find anything in the deed on that one?
Yes, yeah, we look at there was a covenant.
That's what I was wondering, if there's a covenant that it can't be.
Yeah, there was a covenant, that we were able to file, it's got to include out of this slide, but.
Is that the original grant? I mean, there might be some restrictions if you wanted to unload that.
Yeah, it was more for the recent grant, it was a recent federal grant we got.
Because that's when they got on the National Historic
Right.
Landmark, what else is a 10-year easement or something on the.
Yeah, I say, at one thing, maybe 10-year, 15-year. Some deed restrictions on this property. Provide that detail. Commercial building. We have on the lot for this one, it's as well, just based on the initial cost of $1, but that's where we stand. This one, the assessed value is $933,000, but for our property insurances for the city, we value at 1.7 million. So that's the number I use for the current value. We have a recent purchase of 2635 Boundary Street. That should cost them $230,000. Current value is $250,000. ROI about 7%. And this is an old coffee shop property, 2153 Boundary Street, acquired in May of 2020 for $200,000. It has a ROI about 85%. Then we also, just to consolidate this presentation even more, there's another spreadsheet of a list of properties that we did not include in this presentation, but that is provided in your agenda packet. You have what the purchase price and assessed value is. We try to highlight one of the properties or something more value properties as well. But shows everything else that the city owns based on property tax bills that we pay. Commerce Park is made up of a lot of different properties. You see all of the plus the numbers associated with it, along with the addresses. This one has initial cost of 1.8 million with the geo bond, and then we also purchased 417,000 for additional properties. Current value is 6.1 million when you add up all of those properties. some revenue expenses, and then you see the ROI about 188%. And also I'll provide in the agenda packet a economic analysis from the university updated last past January. Kind of shows a little more information as well.
If you have any questions about that, John, on the tool on the back, we'll. Kelly.
Yeah. Last property is, I think it owns a cell phone tower. I believe the communication tower was constructed in 1999. Not sure about the initial cost for the city, that's $100,000 for our calculation. Current value, we don't have any property tax was associated with it, but they're having some recent offers of people interested in purchasing it, or valued at about 300,000. Some revenues, expenses associated with it. The ROI is about 330%. There are some long-term lease agreements in place with these cell phone carriers. There's AT&T and T-Mobile. And we did look more into those agreements to see kind of how long the city has to adhere to those lease agreements, whether we're locked in, whether there's any way to get out some of those.
On those lease agreements, you know how much per year
Yeah.
getting the revenue?
Yeah, there was. Per year, we get about $23,000 a year from the T-Mobile lease and about $12,600 from AT&T. So total about $36,000 per year revenues based on our lease agreements for those two providers. Questions and any comments? I love the one.
No comments, yes. Me. Other questions? No comments, yes, for me.
Okay.
If you go first, if somebody else.
All I was gonna say is thank you for doing this, but what I'd like to see in the future, if you do this periodically, you don't need to do it on. Most of it, just some of these items. What we have geo bonds and all that, if you could have what remains in terms of what we have to take off. And what they didn't do, interest, just for our applications.
You're looking the issue of the beacon that will be hitting your mailbox soon. We have almost for like this in obligation funds.
Okay, good.
All that information is in there, I believe, except for maybe the interest rate. Yeah, but the rest of the information we're solving that story.
Good.
So we want the public to also what it is.
Josh, you want to go ahead with the comments?
Sure. So with the understanding that to satisfy the apparent request, I guess this fits the bill for ROI. When I saw it, some of the information I didn't feel like I could wasn't useful for me. Like if I'm looking at it and I see, 100 million% return, I check out there. But moving forward, so. And you probably know a whole lot more about this than I do. You absolutely do. So I'm just going to bring this up as kind of what I was able to learn through this process aside. And ROI typically is for your short-term investments. So I got together with a friend of mine who has more experience in Excel than I do, and he helped me put together a worksheet. And what I wanted to do was come up with an internal rate of return, which would be used for, just to provide a more comprehensive analysis and take into consideration the time value associated with some of these properties that we own. So I did two, one for the Commerce Park and one for Morale Park. And with the Morale Park analysis, we went back and determined what approximately $22 an hour would cost for landscaping and just general upkeep on the property. We went back to 1990 and ran six different examples. So an hourly wage that's equivalent to $22 an hour back in 91 was $8.42. So with a 3% increase on that year over year to date in 24, we factored in the expense for upkeep. And then ran, like I said, 6 examples, 1 being as if we bought it for $1, 2 being as if we paid $1,000, 3 being 10,000, 4 being 50, 5 being 100,000. And then in the last example is if we purchased it for $100,000 and had no landscaping upkeep expenses added in. The results showed that if we purchased it for $1, our internal rate of return was about 15.9%. The ROA was equivalent to what you had factored in here at 43 million. And then in the 5th example, which was us purchasing for $100,000 and factoring in the expenses of landscape, we had an internal rate of return of 4.3%, a total profit of 338,000 with the assessed value, obviously. And then an average annual rate of or return on investment of 9.9%. And then for the commerce part, basically just plugged in the same information that you gave us in the slide. The acquisition in May 1st of 2012, 209 acres, costed 1.8 million. Acquisition in September of 2019, 28 acres, cost of 417,000. Current assessed value of 6 million. Factored in the revenues and expenses, the total cost, and basically just did for 12 years of ownership. So with the cash flows being placed at the timeframes that we were given in the slide, the internal rate of return was 10.8%. The profit was 4,263,000. The rate of the return on investment was 188%, and the average annual rate of investment was 15.67%. So that to me in the commerce part still is, I mean, a internal rate of return, as far as my understanding goes, of 10% is pretty good. So it would absolutely justify, especially with a good portion of the expenses behind us, not liquidating that asset. But I think moving forward, if we're gonna put the time into producing this, having a more comprehensive overview would, I know, be helpful for me. So like I said, you know a whole lot more about that than I do. So I just wanted to share a little bit of what I was able to learn through this process, kind of taking the information that you provided in these slides to produce data that was more useful for myself anyway. So anyway, aside from that, I appreciate all the work that I know went into producing this, and you were basically giving us what was asked for at a rate of, or the return on investment. It just is, as city manager pointed out, it's kind of on some of these, it's silly formula to use because it's definitely not going to spit out the information that you want to see. I guess that you would want to, but it's not going to be, relevant to what it actually is.
Appreciate that. Anybody else?
But yeah, just a general comment. I mean, I guess we need to kind of zero in on assets that the city has that would be practical, had a negative ROI, liquidated. So I don't see anyone selling any parks, right?
Correct.
It's just kind of a lot of time for staff. That's not gonna really mean anything. So.
Yeah, you can't really focus on the money. You gotta focus on what is it to the community.
Yeah,
What is it gonna be?
I mean, if you were looking at something, I don't know, trying to think of an example.
Well, in the fire department for here, like how are we gonna measure the service that's provided? And that's the point of building the fire department. So I guess we could talk about whether or not it was too expensive, but the reality is you're not really going to judge that on the return on investment. It's more so gonna be the service that you provide through having that facility. Yeah.
I would recommend that if you wanted to focus on properties that you wanted to consider for sale, you would first look at properties that were not identified and or providing a clear public purpose at the moment.
Maybe a piece of land, something like that.
Piece of land, the Vino's lot, for example, something that's not actively serving a public purpose.
Something I could see.
A few years ago, we had some extra property, I think it had to do with some, pump stations and things like that, that we got rid of. It also has some property in the corner of North Reba where they built houses for affordable housing. And we had property behind Middle, on Mock Oaks Road, that was given a habitat, and that put 2 homes in there, so. If you can find, if we had more property, we could do that. Unfortunately, where we do have some property that could work for affordable housing, you're in the AQs. And so you're limited, you can't put any density in there. That's an issue.
Is there anything as a result of this information we provided to you that council would like staff to do?
Just what I mentioned earlier, but next time, let's do this periodically, but not on everything, just on certain ones that we identify.
Mr. Mayor, would it make sense for maybe us to have a meeting where we identify what those properties are, and then once we identify those properties, we can just give them to staff and say, this is what we'd like to see analysis on, but then you guys would know.
Absolutely. I think this is a great starting point. I think maybe if you chew on this up to leading to our strategic planning session, that we can factor some time in to look at properties, and you can have more free flowing discussion on which properties are really serious about taking a look at. Does it make sense to offer this for sale or not?
And the fact that the Beacon is gonna have all that information on our.
They'll have the GOI information.
Public costs.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Stewart?
Thank you. I have this gray hair and this experience with situations like this, and I'm familiar with one where some citizens, because of personal agendas, managed to talk a county in Georgia into the idea that they should not build a jail because the jail was expensive and they shouldn't have to do it. And so they tried to push their prisoners off on some other folks until a federal judge came in there and ordered them to build a jail the way the federal judge thought it was, at the expense the federal judge thought was appropriate. And the people that were complaining were nowhere to be seen when that came over to roots. There was a Midwestern city of significant size that was convinced to sell their parking meters to a third-party group because that group could run it more efficiently than the city could. And they did, except the pricing for parking got to be so onerous that the businesses and residents began to suffer and began to complain to the people who had received a cash payment for the parking to set off other things. And so I look at that seal on the wall that says this city was founded in 1711 by people who lived here, not because they want to pay extra taxes, but because they wanted streetlights, because they wanted police, because they wanted fire, because they wanted a library, because they wanted schools, because they wanted services, and wanted the government to provide it. You are not a portfolio of real estate investments. You are the body that our people who invest in this community and the people who live here look to provide the service that no one else can provide effectively. So for someone to try to push you into thinking that a fire station is an economic investment is not only self-serving, it is shallow and inappropriate for the risks that we ask you to undertake running our fire department. For someone to indicate to you that the federal requirements and the state requirements that you own and operate a court and a jail system puts right into mix the problem they had in Buena Vista, Virginia, when they pledged that against a debt and the debt came due and the state of Virginia said, you can't sell your courthouse and jail, you'll stop being a city. So do you want to sell the street lights? And so if people want the street light, work out for their house and go orders out? Of course not. This exercise is an interesting drill one time. The reality is whoever it is that's pushing you to do this may have an agenda, but if you have surplus property and you don't have any long-term plans for it, and I would mention the coffee shop is the first block in what was intended to be a belt buckle park on Boundary Street and Intercoastal Waterway. If you choose to abandon that and you choose to do something, that's your choice to make. But for someone to imply that you ought to, as people have said, get rid of the institutions that make this city simply because the property may be titled to you, is short-sighted and doesn't care about this city. Should we do as one person suggested, let's run the churches out of town because that property is not paying taxes. Let's run the university out of town because they're not paying taxes. That is just no way for a government to operate and for the citizens to receive this services from you. If we ran a referendum tomorrow and said, We're considering selling Pitney Point Park, Washington Park, Waterfront Park, and the police department. Please give us your vote. Not only would you have a resounding, that's ridiculous, don't do it. You'd have some people questioning whether or not you needed some psychological examination. And I would suggest to you the psychological examination is probably merited, but not for you, because that's not what you're doing. It's what you're being asked to do. And I hope you won't. Thank you.
Anyone else? Sarah, you don't have anything?
I'm debating. Ryan Farrelly, 2415 Oak Haven Street. I don't think anyone is suggesting that we sell government properties that are providing services for our city. I know that in prior meetings, talk was raised about selling maybe some properties that were not doing anything for the city. This was a very interesting exercise in many ways. My comment, I think, would be that if you continue to think about unproductive properties to sell, not only would you look at perhaps the return on investment, but the even small amounts of revenue coming in that exceeds outlay could help fund some of the city properties. I mean, the city properties, all of these assessments are on paper. It doesn't mean anything. You're not gonna sell it, you're not gonna realize that money. So it doesn't really mean anything. Just in terms of looking towards properties that you might wanna sell, what is it costing us really? What are we getting it for it really? And what is the projected capital expenses that might come to? That's all I'll just say. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Very quick comment, Joe Max, City Resident, 1100 Boundary, I'll just say that I haven't seen the offices in there, but I have seen the gymnasium, the basketball, so when you have offices and a park all in one. I think the title was on the slide was US, you don't have to do it, USCB and something Coast Cyber Center, I probably butchered it, South Coast Cyber Center. And that's that, and then you all can correct me if I'm wrong, that's the only basketball court the city owns. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I drove all the way over here, so I'm gonna say something. I was looking up a quote, a friend of mine, I'm John O'Toole with the Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation. A friend of mine used to have at the end of his emails, to every complex problem, there's a simple, clear, and wrong answer. And so I think asking this question in particular for an organization like ours is merited. And I think it's good to look at it and see how we're performing. But as you go through it, things that may not have been considered, I'm glad you looked at the acreage cost, and thanks for your work in terms of looking at a 10% year-over-year return is good, but that didn't just happen. You know, city leaders took it upon themselves to put broadband in the park. Our organization, just to give you an idea, has secured about $1.1 million that didn't show up in your math. And that's no problem, but the Department of Commerce sees the value in it. So we're bringing state tax dollars back in. But just to give you an idea, we bought the acreage from the Gray family at one point. The county pitched in half of that. So you picked up 28 acres in the Commerce Park since your initial purchase. At the landing pad, we brought $180,000. When we were looking to pave the roads, it was hard to find somebody to pave the roads, and Jared Freilich, working with us and a grant from the Department of Commerce, secured $200,000 to pave the road. So it gives a very good impression. Things that we are looking at, things that you could consider instead of selling assets. We're looking at buying 18.2 acres off of Parker Drive, and there might be an opportunity to annex an existing or two taxpayers into the city that want to have that conversation. So again, $1.1 million.
Something that doesn't really show up though when you do it simply is the 129 direct jobs and the 14, let me make sure I don't throw the numbers around wrong. The $14 million in annual income that the residents are making out there. Let me just see, 14.2. And then sales off of those jobs and the production that's going on out there, 54 million. So there's more to it, but I do think it is a good exercise to bring us in periodically and make sure we are hitting the mark for return on investment. So we're glad to be here, but it's always complex because you can even put it through and go to a reputable organization, depending on how you feel about Gamecocks or Clemson. But you can go to Clemson and they've got a model, an economic model, and so we can put our results through that. But it's worth the conversation. So I'm glad you did it as it pertains to us. Thank you.
And that was included in our packet.
Yes, yeah, no, I know that. Yeah, I didn't think you missed anything. I just think, we always tell people who want data, the more data you ask, and we provide a lot of data begs more data, and you gotta be willing to dive into it to understand what you're looking at. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, everyone. Jess O'Brien, Beaufort Digital Corridor. I just want to thank you for, again, giving us the opportunity to be here and talk. I understand the concern that some might have about building expenses and income being less than the expense on paper, and it's a valid point to raise, and I appreciate the opportunity to address it. Like John said, I think it's important to consider other long-term return on investments beyond the balance sheet. For example, our building at 500 Carteret serves as a hub for economic development and innovation. Houses not only the Beaufort Digital Corridor, but also the Southern Carolina landing pad run by the Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation, which attracts global companies looking to establish themselves in South Carolina in the US market. Not only that, but it has attracted external funding as well from grants. And then there's a multiplier effect as well. The building's purpose goes beyond simple revenue. It's a platform for entrepreneurs, startups, and small businesses that stimulate the local economy. The companies and individuals who utilize 500 Carteret generate jobs to attract talent to Beaufort and spend money locally, which benefits us all. Lastly, 500 Carteret directly corresponds with the city's long-term strategy to diversify our economy and foster innovation. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. If anyone wants any specific data or you're looking for specific ROI from our organization or other organizations that are in the building, just let me know. We do believe in visibility and would be ready and willing to provide that data. So I appreciate you.
Anyone else? I want to thank you, Alan, for going through this, and a lot of it we probably didn't need to know on the city. I think it's a good exercise. It also shows us that most of what we have, there's a reason for why we do it. Anyway, with that, there's no other comments.
Just want to remind everyone that our first quarterly capital projects workshop will be next Tuesday at 5 o'clock, or Tuesday, 5 o'clock. Also want to remind everybody that the food drive, the first responder food drive is still going on. We have a box in our lobby. I think there are boxes at fire stations. If you have any goods that are non-perishable and good through at least 2025, I think, please consider donating them.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Alan, and staff also, because now I know all the properties that are owned by the city, which I didn't know. I had an idea. I just felt.
Did you know we own a cell phone tower?
That's
I did that.
That's the only one I didn't know about.
I was surprised when I learned it first. That's it. Thank you, man.
That's it. I'll adjourn this meeting, and thanks everyone for coming.